Welcome Perspectives in Child Maltreatment. So what I'm going to do now is take you through our first test. We'll do a test review here. This is a multiple choice test. 36 items. All right, so you need to know that the definition of child abuse includes physical abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, neglect, and sexual abuse. You need to know that child abuse is defined as any act, generally deliberate, by a parent or guardian that results in the harm or death of a child. You need to know that professional development in child maltreatment began in the 1960s. Infanticide. You need to know that infanticide is defined as the killing of an infant, particularly a newborn. This is generally deliberate and intentional murder. Okay, during the Reformation, corporal punishment became a standard means of addressing a child's sin nature and reinforcing religious education. You also need to know that during the Middle Ages, laws against infanticide were first passed. According to John Locke, children are tabula rasa, blank slate, and need only to be shaped and molded. During the Industrial Revolution, breaker boys worked in the coal industry. They removed impurities from the coal before it was sold. They often died from suffocation when falling from their stools. The use of learning techniques to modify or change behavior, specifically to increase desirable behavior, is called behavior modification. This is considered by experts to be an alternative to corporal punishment. During the 1970s, American children were removed from homes when parents neglected to give them medical care, neglected to give them basic necessities of food and water. So during the 1970s, American children were removed from homes when parents neglected to give them basic necessities of food and water, and neglected to give them medical care. One of the first children to be removed from her home was named Mary Ellen, after someone from the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals sent an undercover investigator to visit the home. One of the first children to be removed from her home was named Mary Ellen, after the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals sent an undercover investigator to visit the home. Child advocacy studies training is a nationally recognized curriculum to train students how to effectively address child abuse and neglect in real-world applications through multidisciplinary team coordination. Successful completion of CAST courses will enable students to identify child abuse and neglect, report child maltreatment appropriately, and to be a viable team member in the prevention and remediation of child maltreatment. CAST, Child Advocacy Studies, is important because families are suffering from lack of appropriate responses. The CAST program involves multidisciplinary approach for higher education classes, allows students from various disciplines to learn to work together to identify and to work with situations involving child abuse and neglect. It brings academia and practice into application, and it aims to completely eradicate child maltreatment in the generations to come. The first juvenile court was established by 1900. The first juvenile court was established by 1900. All but three states had juvenile courts by 1920. All but three states had juvenile courts by 1920. A multidisciplinary approach might include representation from law enforcement, child protective services, prosecutors, medical professionals, mental health workers, victim advocacy, and children's advocacy center. In Galt, 15-year-old boy spent 5 years in detention for lewd remarks over the telephone. Court was moved to award due process for adolescent offenders. The court moved to grant the right to be cross-examined for witnesses to be cross-examined. Child advocates must provide culturally competent services for all clients through the life of the case in order to ensure that children from all walks of life are understood and professionally cared for. Researching child maltreatment is challenging because only confirmed abuse is measured. Children who are not discovered cannot be measured, and they may differ from those who have disclosed abuse. Correlational research is common, and correlation cannot show causation. The battered child syndrome was an important article published by the American Medical Association, changed the landscape of child maltreatment as a movement. Correlational research can be very helpful because we can identify related variables, if not exactly how those variables are related. Children's advocacy centers provide forensic interviews, which have become critical components of any child abuse investigation. Parens patria is a Latin phrase which means the state acts on behalf of a child or mentally ill person and is the ultimate guardian for children. A retrospective design uses data based on recollections of past events. A retrospective design relies on recollections of past events. For child abuse terminology to be operationalized, it must include precise terminology, it must be measurable, it must be observable. For child abuse terminology to be operationalized, it must include precise terminology, it must be measurable, it must be observable. Risk factors associated with child maltreatment could indicate that a child is an elevated risk to be maltreated. It could also include low parental education, parental depression, and substance abuse. When it comes to neglect, female caregivers are more likely to be guilty. When it comes to physical abuse, male caregivers are more likely to be guilty. Almost 80% of families investigated by CPS have substance abuse histories? Mothers suffering from depression are more likely to lack positive interaction with their child. They're more likely to express overtly hostile behavior toward their child. Parents who maltreat their children often lack basic caregiving skills. They know less about children and child development, and they may have unrealistic expectations about what children can do. Having low socioeconomic status and a single parent who did not finish high school are both a risk factor for child maltreatment. Having low socioeconomic status, a single parent who did not finish high school are both a risk factor for child maltreatment. Researchers estimate that domestic violence is witnessed by 10 million children between the ages of 3 and 17 annually. Children with a low socioeconomic status are 5 times more likely to experience child maltreatment. Children with a low socioeconomic status are 5 times more likely to experience child maltreatment. This correlational research shows that extreme stress, unstable housing, poor community support are highly related to child maltreatment. Highly related to child maltreatment. Okay, this completes your test review. Watch this video. I would recommend making flashcards, studying these items well. If you study this review well, you should have no problems with this test. All right, have a good day.